Right, people are coming on into the room, ready for this conversation. Yeah, we're getting started here in a little bit, ready for this amazing conversation we're going to have with these spectacular thought leaders on the issue of decolonizing. It's a sensitive topic, but a necessary topic. And so we're glad that you have taken your afternoon to join us this afternoon to figure all this out. I don't know if you'll leave completely understanding exactly how to do it, what to do right, what to do wrong, or anything like that. But the idea of going one step further to transform our minds and transform the lives of our ministries and ourselves and others is within our ability today. All right, so let's go ahead and start the recording and get going. Hello, family. Welcome to season 3, episode 4 of New Church Hacks. We're almost at our last episode of the season. It's always a hard time to deal with because every season just keeps getting better and better. This is our 3rd season. We're talking about some great things and having a good time understanding and taking our knowledge to the next level. I am your sibling, Pastor Terrell L. McTire. I serve as the minister of New Church Strategies in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, New Church Ministry. We are recording this. The playback will be available to each one of each one of you, available at newchurchhacks.com shortly after this episode. There you'll also find other episodes of this digital series, which provides practical and sometimes even peculiar prompts for the church from start to restart. Today, we are exploring crucial hacks to decolonize your church or your ministry. Decolonization is not a metaphor. It is not a catch-all term that denotes any social justice movement that takes place. It is actually a living, breathing movement aimed at ensuring that BIPOC futurality and sovereignty can be dismantled, and by dismantling the broad structures of oppression that have and continue to prevent BIPOC from striving. And so maybe you don't even understand or if you're not even familiar with that term of BIPOC, that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. We want all people to be able to strive, even those that have been historically marginalized. So decolonization requires action throughout all facets of society, deconstructing the prevailing power structures from academy to pop culture to even, yes, our organized religion. And there is a strong likelihood that your church or your organization actually is colonialistic. And if so, we are glad that you are here to be a change agent for your community. So stay until the very end when I will give you 7 totally off topic but invaluable new church hacks. And later you'll have an opportunity to ask our topic leaders questions. And if you think of something along the way, go ahead and throw it into the chat feature. This is an active conversation. We want to know what's on your mind as well. So share your tips, share your resources, share the books that you're reading on the topic. We are all learning together. And so also we want to know where you are, who is at our table today. So go ahead and throw into the chat feature, tell us where you're from and what you do. We would love to hear that. So to begin, let's tell you a little bit about our conversationalist today. The first one of us is Brandon Rencher. Brandon is a minister and an organizer of the Good Neighborhood Movement. Brandon is with us today. Brandon, I have a question for you so people can understand a little bit more about who you are and what you do there at the Good Neighbor Movement. What would you say the purpose of GNM is?
Yeah, thanks for having me. What's up, y'all? The purpose of GNM, I think in short, what we say is church as community organizing. It's really important for us to invite ordinary folks, laity, folks who are not already engaged in the work of social justice, to learn what it means to be engaged in what we call contemplative activism. Contemplative means doing the inner work that is necessary to do in order to make the changes that we want to see externally in our local communities. So that's what it looks like. And we're structured in a really unique way as a network of groups, because we believe that in order for us to see the kind of change that is that we deserve and that we know is necessary. It's going to take a leaderful movement, a leaderful organization. And so we believe, like our ancestors, that getting folks involved in their local communities in groups to take leadership in order to deepen their spirit that propels them to take action in their local community is the way to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Hopefully you'll tell us how we all can get involved. We all want to be involved in the movement. So thank you so much for being here. Also, Naomi Washington-Leapheart is the director for faith-based and interfaith affairs for the city of Philadelphia and faith work director for the National LGBTQ Task Force. Naomi, thank you so much for being here. What is the most rewarding part of the work you do in Philadelphia?
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I'm Naomi. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And let me just make a point of clarification. I transitioned from the task force to the city of Philadelphia government. And all of the work that I do has as its core the goal of faith as freedom. Whether I'm in City Hall or on the streets of North Philly, participating in an uprising as a movement chaplain, or advocating for policy change at the local or state or federal levels, I'm interested in a faith that sets me free and a faith that sets other people free. And so the most rewarding part of that work is the testimonies of the newly freed folk who realize that their faith has indeed made them more of themselves every day. So I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we want to make sure we check out your t-shirt. Show us what you got going on there.
God is from Detroit. I am from Detroit. And, you know, people don't have a whole lot of nice things to say about Detroit. But I want to remind us that God indeed is incarnate in Detroit as well, my home city.
Okay. All right. Hey, if you say so, there must be 2 or 3 of you there gathered, and we know when that happens, God is present. So absolutely, we appreciate that invitation to come to Detroit is what I hear. All right.
It is.
All right, great, fantastic. And now we also have Chris Morton. Chris is the regional minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Nebraska and the director of Cotner College Educational Ministries. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Also, I have a question for you. How important is it to you that your region of the Christian Church is becoming anti-racist?
It's very important. First, I want to say to Naomi, I want to come to Philadelphia and hang out with that community. That sounds great. Boy, I think here in Nebraska, we are across the spectrum of church communities who believe that there aren't people of color in their communities, so there is no racism, to churches that are diving deeply into the question of what does it mean to be a racist in this day, and how does that show up, and what can I do about it? And it's all across the board. So to our knowledge, this region has not required our clergy to go through anti-racism training. And so at our last Pastoral Leadership Commission or Commission on Ministry, I asked them to adopt a resolution to require ministers to go through anti-racism training every 3 years. We think that might be the first time that the regional church board approved that resolution. So we are instituting that anti-racism training. The good news is that even before all of that, Mid-America region did an online anti-racism training, and just by promoting it a couple of times, more than 10 of our clergy signed up for that. So there's a hunger, there's a thirst here, and we want to reflect that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the good work that you're doing in Nebraska and across the entire church. So each of you have an opportunity to inquire of our presenters towards the end. Again, if you have any pressing questions regarding decolonizing your community of faith, please put them in the Q&A section. We're going to try to get to them at the end, but we have a lot to say on this topic. And hopefully if we don't get to the Q&A in this particular segment, we're going to stay afterwards and have more conversation and answer a few questions. But first, we have a question for you to start off in a poll. So throwing this poll up, what is your personal familiarity with the concept of decolonizing, decolonization? Are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, not very familiar, or you have no idea what it is at the least? Either way it goes, we're happy that you're here, but go ahead and start throwing your answers into the poll. And Naomi, as you see those answers coming in, maybe you have some thoughts about what people are saying, what people are choosing as their answer. So I'm gonna have you get us started here as far as helping us understand from the very beginning what decolonizing is.
Thanks so much. So I see from the poll that more than half, 66% of folks say that they're somewhat familiar with the concept of decolonization. And then we're sort of evenly split, the rest of us, very familiar, not very familiar, and have no idea. So wherever you happen to be on that spectrum, I want you to know that you're in the right conversation, you're in the right place. There's no judgment based upon what you came in the room knowing. I want to kick us off by reading a sort of generic definition of decolonization that we might agree with or disagree with as the conversation goes on, but just to give us a base, give us a foundation so that we're all talking about maybe the same thing as we go into this conversation. So I'm pulling this definition of decolonization from two places. One is Wikipedia, which we know is the holy grail of needing to find something out really quick. And a site maintained by Haverford College. It's a site all about global solidarity. And so they've got some good stuff about decolonization here. So first from Wikipedia, decolonization is the undoing of colonialism. What is colonialism? The process whereby a nation establishes and maintains its domination of foreign territories. So a nation establishes and maintains its domination of foreign territories. I want to say a little bit more about colonialism from this Haverford College site. Colonialism is a historical and ongoing global project where settlers continue to occupy land, continue to dictate social, political, and economic systems, and exploit indigenous people and their resources. So decolonialism or decolonization is the process of undoing colonialism, right? And I hope we'll probably say more about that definition and build on it as we go. But I'm gonna go right ahead into my first hack. Am I right about it? Okay. So here's my first hack. Colonialism justifies and sustains itself through what I'm calling mythologies. The stories it tells, right, about itself and about its work, right? There was a book famously written several years ago by a history teacher named James Lowell. And James Lowell wrote the book, Lies My Teacher Told Me. What he wanted to do was disrupt and interrupt the lies that American history teachers are forced to tell about the founding of America as they teach American history, right? Well, I think we need to engage in a lies my church told me conversation, right? I think the Christian church has long been telling lies about its own history and its own work, its impact in the world. And so if you want to be a decolonizing congregation, I think you have to reject revisionist Christian histories and tell the truth about Christianity's role in designing and supporting the system of white supremacy. So what lies have our churches told about ourselves and about Christianity in general? That's my first hack. Oh, and I'm gonna pass the ball now to Chris. I'm sorry. So Chris is gonna now share.
No, actually, real quick, Naomi, I'm trying to absorb that what you just called us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I imagine you are too, Chris.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Whew, I think it's naming what's really at play, that it's the water we're swimming in that's really hard for us to see. And if we don't name it abruptly and straightforwardly, we're going to keep on dancing on eggshells and hoping that we might just avoid that conflict or that tension. And it's tough. The time is now. And it has been for a very long time for a lot of people. And it's really hard for us in the white culture, the Euro descent culture, to climb into that uncomfortable place and say, God, this is really uncomfortable. And I'm not used to being uncomfortable. So often I want to say, stop making me uncomfortable. And that's a truth. I need to hear. We have been lying to ourselves. We've been telling ourselves a story, a mythology. The myth holds a truth, right? At least as I was taught about mythology from my New Testament professor. The myth holds a truth. It surrounds itself with this story and this narrative that's arguable stuff. And I think we're sitting in a lot of arguable stuff or non-truth even.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get at, origin stories are really important,
Yeah.
right? The origin stories we have personally, where you come from, who, how you used to be as a child. And I think the same thing is true for our faith, and particularly our faith institutions. And so what would it mean for us to, in a moment of confession, say, we surrounded a kernel of truth with a whole bunch of lies.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And we repent.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm picking up what you're saying, Brandon, in the chat. You want to say it aloud or no?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, at the heart of what I do on a regular basis, week in and week out, is the work of organizing. And one of my a good organizing is about mentorship. It's about teaching. It's not so much about doing things for folks. And so one of my mentors often says, and I think this is a sort of wisdom saying in the tradition, is that an organized lie is more powerful than disorganized truth. And so what I hear you calling us to is to get organized about the truth, which is tough, disciplined, rigorous, and yet liberating work. And so I appreciate what you've challenged us to do there.
In one small way, if I can jump in with my first hack, the first hack I named is what I call generosity. But let me talk about the opposite of that. This is the lie, or potentially the lie. People are going to argue with me about this. I know it. But I'm going to name it. As a person of Euro descent, a white guy, cisgender male, I think we tell the story in the church that we are hospitable. And we claim, I work with search committees all the time, that one of the first things they want to say is, we're the most hospitable church there is. Hospitality has its own flavor to it from my experience. And I want to talk from my experience. I don't want to pontificate, because that's just furthering the lie that I, as a white guy, can pontificate. No, I can't. I can only share my own experience, and I may be wrong about this. But there's a sense that the church is this hospitable space where everybody's welcome. The lie in that is that it is conditional. We welcome you as long as you will play by our set of rules, the already approved way of being church. So when I come to a church and they say, would you like to preach and serve communion? I say, sure, I'd love to. Can you tell me how you all serve communion? Well, like every other church. No, not at all. We all do it differently. So please walk me through how you do it, because we are all different, right? So the other side of that, I hope maybe moving towards a decolonization, is what I would call generosity, because hospitality's been taken. So I don't want to claim that space anymore. I want to talk about a generous spirit. So it comes from the spirit of who I am. So when I meet Naomi in Philadelphia, I don't assume I know Naomi because she lives in Philadelphia and she's from Detroit, and I have all the stereotypes that tell me who Naomi is because she's a Black woman. No, I want to ask Naomi, who are you? Like, tell me more about growing up in Detroit, and when was that? And what's life like here in Philadelphia? And same thing with Brandon. Come to Greensboro, North Carolina, and sit down with you in your setting to get to know you and ask a generous spirit that leaves myself open, not defensive, not anticipating what I need to say back, but simply listening and hearing. And trust me, and some people in the group that's gathered here know me, I have stepped all over this. I have done some real damage in recent months with some of my colleagues and just things I've said. And it's horrible. It's heartbreaking, but it's part of being generous. It's that this is my spirit. This is who I am. And yep, I'm going to screw up. And I still need to show up.
Absolutely. You reminded me that of my two urging to be generous with myself, showing up transparent, showing up as my full self, because the reality is white culture has conditioned me to not share my authentic self. You know, I have to be a certain thing in order to get the interview, in order to get the job. My name is too ethnic, my style is too this, that, and the other. I have to show up a certain way in order to not be perceived as angry or abrasive, or, you know, all these different things. But what would it look like to just be generous? Like, this is who I am, and invite you into relationship as my full self. So thank you so much for that. Any other?
Brandon, yeah, I was going to ask if do you want to share your first hack?
Well, I actually have one right before that. Naomi muted herself.
Okay.
No problem. Did you want to say something, Naomi?
Well, I was just going to name, I think what you said is so profound, Chris. And, you know, somebody said it this way to me, and it helped me sort of parse out the dangerous or the unwanted kinds of hospitality that often are pervasive in our church communities. They said, you know, white folk are always the host and never the guest. There's something about being a guest that humbles, that decenters, right? So I just wanted to offer that as another kind of analogy to remember. What does it mean to be the guest for a change, right?
Yeah, that's really powerful, because often as I work with congregations, they say, well, there was a family that came and they visited, but they didn't stay, you know, and so they're looking for that staying as the guest and everything, and trying to figure out why it didn't happen. We're all nice people, you know, and so the reality is that sometimes it just doesn't, welcoming isn't good enough. So I'm going to flip around and share my hack here, that there's an uncomfortableness, there's a discomfort that plays a part of actually moving from just being welcoming into a higher calling of how one would be, specifically your congregation. So I think, you know, Chris, you kind of talked about it. I think about the analogy that I have a welcome mat on the front of my door right now. And a minute ago, someone came and delivered a package, and at the front of the door, it said welcome. But he couldn't just like come in my house, come down here, bring me the package, grab something to eat on his way out, you know, stay for, you know, no. So there was a limitation to how welcoming I was, even though I had a banner up saying that they're welcome. And that's why, to me, welcoming has to go to the next level, which is inviting. And so it says, hey, invite, come over, do some things. But even inviting has like its limitations, because it says, I need you to show up at this time. I need you to bring this thing with you. I need you to leave at this time. And these are the parameters of how much you can actually engage in my house. So even though we invite people to church, they better not sit on such and such as pew or in such and such seat. You know, we're not inviting them to just get up and hit the microphone and sing a solo if they so choose. Like, there's limitations to the invitation, which is why we must go to the next step, which to me is participation. So it goes into saying, yes, I just don't want you here, but I actually want you to actively be a part of what it is that we're doing. So even if you do ask them to participate in the rituals of the table and the things that happen during communion, there is still a limitation of the participation because they may not know the way in which we do it, or they may not know how to do that. So to me, the ultimate place we want to go and the most uncomfortable place for us to attain is that of collaboration. Collaboration says, I'm going to bring mine, you're going to bring yours. We meet somewhere mutually in the middle and we have equal sacrifice. I'm going to take off something I think value, you're going to take off something you value. And together, we're going to team up with the chief creator, the chief co-carpenter, to be able to build something brand new that looks a little like you, a little like me, a little less like me, a little less like you, somewhere in the middle. So I'm encouraging you all to be uncomfortable, step into a place where you have your welcome, but take it all the way further and figure out how we can collaborate with other entities of the community. All right, B, your turn, friend.
All right. Yeah, I love that the invitation to collaboration. And I think that as we you're challenged to think about who you're collaborating with. Maybe in that discernment, a question that you and that we all can ask ourselves, which is my hack, is who are your people? Now, I'm from the South, and this is one of the first questions that you get asked when you bring somebody over. It's not first, what's your job title or how much money you make? It's first, who your people? Who your people? And here's the reason why that is an important question for us in the South, but I'm also going to sort of decolonize even that expression, right? Like sort of to radicalize it a little bit. Colonization, like Naomi mentioned, it begins with displacement. It begins with displacement, with erasure, erasing people, erasing their cultures, erasing their sense of place. And so for white folks, this means asking yourself the question, who were your people before they were white? And the follow-up question, what did your people have to erase to become white? Right? And for Black folks and other folks of color, the question is, who were your people before they were racialized? They weren't always Black or brown or whatever the racial identification is that we have placed on our people, right? It's not to say that race is not an important factor, right? It is a social construction and it has real life implications. And it's also true that before I was Black, that my people had ethnic ways of life, our own religion, our own culture, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, racialization as a mode of decolonization, or as a mode of colonization, is a way of erasing the origins of a people. And so I think for Black folks and for people of color, we have to ask ourselves the question, before we were racialized, what were the ethnic ways that were erased from our people, and how can we reclaim those?
I love it. I love it. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, me too. I love it too. And the part that I love is, one, being able to listen in and hear you say that, Brandon, right? So having the ability to be here and listen to you just say it right out loud, and then go inside me as a white guy to say, so what are my roots? It's no wonder I don't respect your roots. I don't even know mine, really. So what's it, right? It quickly becomes, what's it really matter? Aren't we all the same? No, we're not. We're all different, and we're all from different places, and that carries with it a lot of meaning. And most people that I know in this country that look like me, you're a descent, we don't know that. I mean, I have a sense of that story because we've done genealogy, but I don't know the story. I don't know my family origin. I just happen to know where some of my family may have started from voluntarily to come to this country.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick up on Brandon's hack and introduce my second hack. It also comes from a kind of colloquial expression that comes from the communities that made me and raised me. The question we often ask when invited to go to a gathering or trying to think about, whether or not we're going to go to the concert, who all going to be there, right? This is a question that is asked, and it has so much more meaning. It's kind of coded, right? Not necessarily asking for a list of people, the list will not be satisfying. What I really want to know is, are the right people going to be there? Who made the invitation list, right? Colonization thrives when we set the table of engagement according to anti-Black, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Indigenous, anti-woman standards. And if you want to be a decolonizing congregation, I think you got to ask that question: who else will be there, right? When we're participating in that ecumenical event, when we're doing that, pulpit swap, when we are, creating a committee to manage the hiring process that we're engaging in our church, who is at this table? And more importantly, who's missing? Who should be here but is not? Who can't be here because we have erected obstacles to slow them down, right? Who all gonna be there? Such a critical question. I know for me as a Black queer woman in Christian ministry, it is a matter of security for me. And I mean that literally and spiritually, right? To know who will be in the room and who is designing the conversation that I've been invited to have, right? So I think this is a critical question. In addition to who your people, who are gonna be there.
Fantastic. Chris, you want to jump on in with your next hack?
Be happy to. I think there's a tie-in here to not only what you just said, Naomi, but other comments too. But again, from a person of Euro descent, cisgender male perspective, we have been taught as Euro descent folks that it's okay to have the answer and to be in charge. In fact, it's encouraged of us to be in charge, to take charge, to kind of set standards, and to have all the rules established by what we already know. That's colonization from my experience. The hack that I want to offer is one of humility. Again, I'm not saying, I'm not pretending to be this person. It's just like preaching, right? There's a good news and I don't always live up to it. And so humility is the good news. We don't have the answers. We don't know. We don't know how church ought to be. We have no idea. We're all exploring what it means to be church. And in this day and age, I want to come and invite other people of Euro descent to come with questions and curiosity and a sense of humility and a willingness to ask. So if you're going to come be part of our church, what will that mean for you? Not, here's how we are structured and here's our board and our committees and where would you like to be involved? Would you like to teach Sunday school? Because here's how we do Sunday school. Here's the curriculum we use. What if we asked, oh, I'm understanding you like teaching. How would you go about teaching a class here? Would it be for young people, adults? Would you use a curriculum or would you make it up yourself? How would you do, right? A whole different way of just orienting myself to people who I come in contact with in the church and around the church and outside the church, rather than assuming I know because I come from the dominant culture and this is the way things are.
Yeah, that ties very much into the hack I want to bring up personally next is move from need-based to asset-based ministry, ASSET, asset based ministry. I know that from the very beginning of being taught to be a Christian, it meant to give to the needy and view anyone else besides yourself needy, or even view yourself as needy, to a degree of saying that, you know, I need this, that, and the other. But now I'm starting to I'm understanding, and this points back to what you were saying at the beginning, Naomi, that some of that is a very colonized theology in the way that we think about being Christians. And so our ministries are set up in this need-based type of way. And so one of the things I want to say there is, like, move from just having comfort ministries into having challenge ministries. So if you're going to have a ministry that is based off of giving people food, don't just give out the food, but also understand the root of hunger and how your church can get involved in helping to actually figure out why people are hungry and what you can do on a systemic level to end hunger. And so the Bible actually has all these stories that are very need-based, which is very Christ, very, very much like Christ, to consider the needs of another. But sometimes we have to even think about the filter through which we read a story. Like, for instance, when we talk about giving bread to the needy or bread to the hungry, when I think about that story through an asset-based lens, I'm not just looking at who needs the bread. I'm looking at the farmer that tilled the wheat, provided the wheat. I'm looking at the baker that actually baked the bread. I'm looking at the oven maker who made the oven, and the fire started who started that fire. All of these are the necessary components to even get into the bread. So where do we look at our community and see the gifts of people, the skills of people, the human resources that are in there, not just looking at them as something that needs us. So we don't filter your community through this lens of poverty. Identify the way in which they are equal partners in the ecosystem of wealth within your neighborhood. So whenever someone who has never lived in a materially poverty lifestyle seeks to obey God's call to spend yourself in behalf of the hungry or satisfy the needs of the oppressed, the way Isaiah 58 tells us to do, we need to be mindful of a common pitfall of poverty alleviation. That's what we want to build ourselves out of. So while the motive for living our neighbors or loving our neighbors in a genuine way and giving this God-given desire to be like Christ, if we are not careful, our hidden sins of our heart can turn into what we intend for good into an opportunity to harm. And it turns out that this good intention will be themselves not enough to care well for the people struggling with poverty. So we can't position ourselves as this great white hope or holding a theology of this God complex, which is a sense of superiority to the low-income neighbors that we are in community with. However subtle that may be, that we have to figure out and figure that out, and the need that we have that is there that makes their life more thriving, and actually we are too. So my comment is, as an asset-based participatory type of approach, it is more effective than just the common transactional need-based approach. Both churches, ministries, a lot of nonprofit organizations actually live to provide for our communities and the people with whom we are in communion. So it's time to make that switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I resonate so deeply with that, Terrell. The way in which needs-based, transaction-based keeps an us versus them orientation, and it keeps us kind of on the surface. And that relates directly to the hack that I want to present now, which is, and it's another colloquial saying that we have in my community that says, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. And here's what that's trying to get at. It's getting at this us versus them and this kind of stand on the surface, which is that colonization operates, like, it thrives off of divide and conquer. It thrives off of mass distraction, right? And so, you know, the historically, some of the best or worst examples are pitting house slaves against field slaves, right? You know, inventing the myth of race as a way to have white poor folks side with white wealthy landowning, slave owning folks, right? And so pitting white poor folks against against the enslaved, right? Again, this mass distraction, this divide and conquer tactic. The truth is that colonization actually get this, y'all. Colonization only works. It only works by a very small percentage of people who own usually the means of production, right? So they depend on our consent to what they do. Catch that, our consent to what they do. So often decolonization looks like building coalition or building solidarity with people who are very different than me or you, right? Let's value our difference rather than operationalizing them to be sources of distraction or violence, right? So let's value our differences and actually build a different kind of power together where we don't consent to the few who are exploiting the many. All skin folk ain't kinfolk.
Shout out to our dear mother, ancestor Zora Neale Hurston, who first told us, right, that all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And I'm just going to segue right into Mother Toni Morrison's wisdom that she left us before she transitioned. And it's connected right to what Brandon has said. You know, she said the function of racism is distraction, right? It keeps you from doing your work, right? That's what Toni Morrison said. And, you know, it's very clear that we live in a very, very distracted culture. And it ain't just because of social media, right? Yeah. Is it on me?
No,
okay.
No, it's
yes.
Chris' turn to talk about his next hack. I think he was responding to some of the Q&A here. Absolutely. You know, I will say, as he prepares, that there are a lot of distractions, and even the work within congregations. I think the pandemic became a distraction rather than an opportunity to really investigate what needs to happen, what needs to be sacrificed, what needs to be changed in order to really be transformative and to be transformed. And so then we can just blame everything that we were doing wrong on the pandemic rather than really looking at how we can be different. So I think this webinar, this teaching comes out at a very great time, because as you are trying to figure out what your ministry, what your organization will do next, do so in non-colonial ways. So investigate what is the colonial parts of your ministry and how can they change, and this is the great time to do so. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. So I want to build on that, and Brandon, your comments too. The word again for me in this hack is reverence. So just to kind of give it a handle. But what I mean by that, like, first off, locating myself. I did not grow up in the church. I didn't. So I grew up in a family that made fun of the church, didn't have any use for Christ language or God language. And by my teenage years and early 20s, I was yearning for something, but not the church. The church was that structure. And I criticized every structure. Now, over time, I have learned to revere those structures, because those structures, you know, when I visited Europe and saw some of the beautiful buildings that are called churches, they were intended to help people connect with this mysterious God that they couldn't put their hands and heads around. And the architecture was a way of capturing that beauty and the majesty of God. That was a wonderful learning. But the colonization side is that ownership. It's the few. And so that few at the national and global level who are in control of this colonization show up in our churches too, so that we colonize our church building. This is church, and it's my church. My grandparents built this church. And what I want to say is that reverence, that's not reverence, that's something else. Reverence is to the majesty, to the unknown, to the mystery that is God's. Not a church building and not a church family, but God's and God alone. So that invites me to now open myself up again to the mystery and the majesty of what it means to be in this community and in these relationships. And then I open myself up to things like art and poetry and music, the lyrics in a song that can be very moving. And it can be in nature when I'm hiking. And so I can go for a walk with anybody and I can experience that mystery and that majesty in a way that sometimes the church building is too confining to have that experience, quite frankly, because it carries too much weight, too much baggage.
Yeah, Chris.
I'm also cognizant of sometimes where those relics of the church should be reverenced, they become idols.
Oh, it's another one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the ownership that's there of the property, the being able to erase that erasure of erase, the important people who once were here, the important people
right.
who have moved out of here, the important people who put their labor into having those beautiful buildings, all of that is not a part of the narrative when they say, this is my church building or my property. So I'm sorry, Brandon, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. No, the theme of reverence, of idols, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can revere that which is actually killing us, And so I appreciate you bringing up idols, Terrell. I think that's really powerful. And Chris, thank you so much for bringing up how reverence, if reverence becomes this sort of little way in which we are seeking to control, right, or to colonize, then it's not really reverence, right? And sort of opening up our imagination to see that truth coming from all sorts of different places. And that definitely relates to my last hack. It makes me, so I'm gonna first say it in the colloquial way that we say it in my community, then I'm gonna say it in another way. The first is tell the truth, shame the devil, right? Another way that we talk about this is that all truth is God's truth. It don't matter where it comes from. If it's truth, all of it is God's truth, right? And so, my mentor, Reverend Lenise Pinker, she says this, that followers of the revolutionary Jesus must learn to speak treason fluently, right? Telling the truth and shaming the devil is about speaking treason fluently, meaning sometimes we have to commit, the truth we tell is going to commit us. We're going to be committing treason to the organizations and the systems and the structures that want to contain and police. Speaking of policing, one of the things that I want to really lift up as one way in which theology has become an idol is the ways in which colonization shapeshifts over time. So, we no longer have a chattel slavery system, right? But we can name other systems that colonization uses here in the US and abroad. But the one that is probably getting the most exposure in today's climate is mass incarceration in the criminal and justice system, right? And so here's where Christians have to learn to tell the truth, that in many ways, the way that system, our system of policing, continues to thrive, right, is from the consent, or to use the language that I think it was William said in the chat earlier, that the consumption that we have around our notions around sin and hell, right? And so, our policing system was about retribution, about revenge, right? It was never about restoration and rehabilitation. And if we start, all we got to do is turn to most churches and you talk to the average person about how they define sin, how they define the afterlife, you're going to start talking about the ways in which we consign people for eternity to eternal punishment. Don't that sound similar to our criminal and justice system? Don't that sound very similar to how we police, right? So if we're more committed to an idol rather than the truth, we got to examine and decolonize I'm not saying throw away the term sin, right? And the term, I mean, we can argue whether or not the term hell is something we have to contend with in the scripture in the first place. But let's say we hold on to it. Let's decolonize it. It has a history to the way that we've used it in our congregations in ways that provide consumption and consent to our system of mass incarceration and criminal injustice.
Woo, good stuff. Y'all preaching on this random Wednesday afternoon. I have one more hack to share. And it again is drawn from that colloquial space. I heard my grandmother and my aunties and mama and them say, you better mind the business that pays you. And what they were saying to us as we were coming up is stay out of other folks' business. Keep your eyes on your own plate, on your own paper, right? And I think that this connects back to what Brandon was saying earlier about colonization. Colonization presumes that the colonizer has access, 24/7, 365 access to ideas, to cultures, to intellectual production, intellectual heritage, to bodies, literal bodies that have been deemed other, right? And so I think the decolonizing congregations have to mind their own bodies and ideas and culture, right? And moral contradictions and hypocrisies. There's so much work to do, right? Introspectively, that we don't have time to be surveilling other folk, to be policing other folk. And so I think that a decolonizing congregation resists the urge and really it's not even an urge, it's a legacy, right? We're talking about a legacy of colonialism that is passed down. So you have it even if you didn't accept it. It's been part of your formation, right? So we have to resist the urge and the legacy to steal and pathologize non-white ways of being and doing, right? Or commodify or fetishize, right? Non-white ways of being and doing. And I'll just say this one last thing and pass it on. This kind of gets to Alan's question that was raised in the Q&A around white congregations, predominantly white congregations, calling a person of color to be the pastor. I was that person. I was the only Black member of the congregation where I was serving as pastor. And there was a way in which that meant that I was both visible and invisible at once, right? I was the only, so you could tell I was in the room, right? I was always highly visible, but I was invisible too, primarily because of what we've already talked about, this erasure, this fetishizing of everything about me, the way I speak, the way I preach, the way I sing, how my hair, my earrings, everything became pedestalized for the white gaze, G-A-Z-E, gaze, right? And that meant that people were so busy paying attention to me that they weren't minding the business that paid them. They weren't working on how to be the best version of themselves that they could be, right? So that's my last hack. Mind the business that pays you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. We here in Nebraska, we are facing that very question. So may want to follow up with you to learn more from your experience. Last hack that I have is the violence of silence, which is, I think, tying in with that kind of fetishizing and fantasizing, and it's a distraction from who we are. If I only have to talk about you, then I don't have to talk about me and admit, this is really uncomfortable. Like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Or, all right, well, given that that's what you think, let me tell you what I really think. And instead we hide behind this wall of silence and think, and there's a place for white folks to go silent, right? It's to listen and to learn and to hear and then speak. And bring up our voice as authentically in that moment, even if it's full of quote unquote mistakes. It's not a mistake if it's really genuinely coming from your heart. It's also an opportunity to learn. You may end up feeling really uncomfortable once you share from your heart and find out, oh, maybe that wasn't such a cool thing, but how else am I going to learn? If I stay in my silence, I won't learn. So it's that violence of silence. The other part of violence of silence is not speaking up. So if I'm a white person in Naomi's church and I notice that we're only talking about how Naomi sings and how she preaches and isn't it great this and the great that, but we're not talking about the lessons that's in Naomi's sermon, and I don't say that to the other white folks, that silence is killing people, literally killing people. So it's up to me as a white guy to say, I got to say, we're probably not talking about the right thing. Can we talk about what's really going on here? It's the same thing as standing in line at the grocery store and the checkout person looks to me as a white guy and says, can I help you? When in fact, there's like 3 other people, all people of color, who were there way before I ever arrived. No, I think somebody else was here first. Let's do this in turn. I got to speak up. I can't hide behind the silence because it is violent. It is hurtful in so many ways.
Wow. Gosh, guys, these were fantastic hacks. Thank you all so much for all of your contributions. We're almost at the end. And so I want to give people an opportunity to just really understand that we here at New Church Ministry are really working to continue to be actively anti-racist and attempting to decolonize even the way in which we start new churches and do church transformation. So, thank you so much for being here. We saw that there were a lot of questions to be answered. Stay with us a little bit afterwards if you have the time to do so. We're going to get into some of these questions, but if you want to be a part of the new church movement within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, we welcome you to labor with us in that. If you know a potential church planter, let them know that I'm here and we're here in New Church Ministry to help come alongside them. And also, I want to give you an opportunity to connect with New Church at newchurchministry.org. Brandon, Naomi, and Chris, how can folks get a hold of you?
I'm happy to just drop my email in the chat. You can send me an email. I can say so much, but just suffice to say that my work with Good Neighbor Movement is if you want to connect there, would love for you to reach out. And then also, if there are opportunities where there is interest in going deeper around this work of decolonization, in particular around the work of faith-rooted organizing in your local setting to make change, that's something that I am happy to support folks in. And so you can send an email. I'll put my email in the chat in the church website.
Great. Thank you so much. Naomi?
I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put my email address and my YouTube channel where you can hear me preach, if you'd like, in the chat. Thank you so much.
I think we would like. So we're going to jump over there to YouTube. And Chris, how can folks get a hold of you?
Same thing. In the chat room, I just dropped my email address. That's probably the best way. And I'll also add my office phone number. All
right. Fantastic. If we're ever in Nebraska, we'll have to stop by and see you. If you want to get a hold of New Church Ministry, you can get a hold of me at Terrell@newchurchministry.org or Wesley@newchurchministry.org or any one of our associates, Jose and Joy. Or you can text me at 317-593-5323. Now at this, again, I want to invite you to stay a little bit afterward when we will have more conversation about this. There were so many questions that came in and so much conversation we had. This was a lot to try to stuff into 1 hour, but we're so grateful that you showed up and that you have been here with us. Now, here are 7 totally off-topic hacks for aspiring thought leaders to build a personal social media presence, okay? So here's one. Choose the right channel. A land and expand type of strategy is a better approach than spreading your insights all over the internet. Number 2, share the person that actually is behind the title. Let your followers know who you are when you let your hair down. Number 3, don't just broadcast, but show interest in others. If you want to attract content that's engaging, you must also be willing to engage others consistently. Number 4, seek out the content by others in your orbit and take the time to like, share, comment on all the things that they're posting. 5, only post the content that you would click on yourself. Do not put out trash out onto the internet. Number 6, get your entire team and tribe involved. Encourage them to share your content. And number 7, develop a paid presence that will that doesn't break the bank, because actually now there's a lot of ways in which you can do that. That is low cost and high impact, which is often the goal. Just as a bonus, feel free to follow New Church Ministry on Facebook. We'd love to follow you back. Thank you again for being with us. On October 30th, we are going to have our Water the Plants Prayer Summit, where we would gather virtually to intercede for the new churches in your community and across the globe. Also remember that the Spirit has challenged us to make 1 million new disciples by 2030. So tearing down the walls of racism and injustice catapults us towards that goal. So let's make sure we get into it. Thank you so much for being here. We will stay a little bit afterwards. You can see this recording and others at newchurchministry.org. God bless you. All right, family. Man, this was a great conversation. And it looks like there was a lot of lively conversation that even just happened right over in the chat too. So to begin this next segment, just make sure, let's introduce ourselves one more time. My name is Pastor Terrell. I am the one of the leaders at New Church Ministry with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ to help us move forward with our church planting initiatives and such. Brandon, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Brandon Rensher. I'm a minister and organizer with Good Neighbor Movement based in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm glad to be here.
Naomi.
Hi, I'm Naomi Washington-Leapheart. I'm based in Philadelphia, originally from Detroit, and I serve as the Director of Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs in the Mayor's Office. And I'm also a professor of theology at Villanova University.
Great, fantastic. Pastor Chris.
Chris Morton, regional minister in Nebraska, and we used to have an institution of higher education called Cotner College. And so it still exists. It's not an institution of higher education in a formal sense, but it's our educational ministries arm. And as things shrink, so the responsibilities get shifted, and I'm at least for now, the director of Cotner College.
Great, thank you. Nadine, welcome. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadine, and I'm the creative writer / digital media specialist for Disciples Church Extension Fund, which includes Hope Partnership Services and New Church Ministry. I'm here in this dark, somehow really dark room in Toronto, Canada.
Welcome from across the border. Wesley.
Hello, everybody. I'm Wesley King. I am the program coordinator for New Church Ministry. I'm also a Disciples seminarian, and I am so moved by this conversation today. It is powerful. There's lots of ouch moments for me, but it's really important work, and I'm really glad that we're having it. So thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you all so much for this contribution. Nadine, I want to connect with you first and see what questions or thoughts you might want to add to this conversation for our panelists.
Yeah, I think that Chris, you had brought it up about, and it's not an original thought, but one of the downsides about being white is that you're kind of put into this melting pot where you have no connection to your heritage, right? You could say like, oh yeah, I'm Irish, but that was hundreds of years ago, and you don't speak Gaelic, nor do people in Ireland speak Gaelic. That's another conversation, and saying, okay, well, if you know your ancestry, would it help you to have that connection, people of color. So my mom's from the Philippines and my dad's white. And so these past couple years have been a really, I want to say the first thought was hard, but it's been hard, good work to try and connect with my own heritage on the Filipino side. But I also worry that that's kind of magic bullet, if I just learn about my heritage and where we came from in the UK or whatever, like that'll be enough. And I always have this, I have the white person in my head and then the POC person in my head, kind of always having this little conversation. And I just, I think Reverend Naomi, you had, and also Chris, you had responded to my question, but maybe lift it up to the wider group, because I don't think it can be seen. So
let me jump in here just to say thank you for the question. And I think that that's absolutely right, especially in a time where ancestry and sort of DNA studies are so proliferated, so a part of the market. I completely hear that question. Two things come to mind. One is I just want to reiterate something that I said for my hack, which is that it's not just who were your people before they became white. It's also what did your people have to erase to become white. So there's nothing comfortable about that on any level. And the second piece that I want to say is that in Good Neighbor Movement, we have like every white person that joins our community that becomes a member is a part of an anti-racist white solidarity group. And part of the work that they have to do is, I know we lift up the importance of anti-racism trainings a lot. If you look at some of the recent studies around the impact of trainings, though, in terms of transformation, it's like one of maybe 10 practices that you have to engage in to really have real moving the needle change in a person's life and in the systems and structures. And so one of the ways that we do that is we don't send our folks to trainings necessarily. We and challenge people to engage in a practice long term. And one of the things that they do in that long-term practice is they engage in something that we developed called an anti-racist genogram. So if you've been to seminary and you went through CPE, clinical pastoral education, you know that there was you probably had to engage with the genogram, which is doing a kind of emotional mapping of your family. Usually it's your immediate family. Sometimes they'll take it out to maybe second generation, but this is taking it out even further than that. And the idea is to map the history of race in your family on an emotional level, which is really, really important. And so it relates to what I said earlier around not just, what religious practices did your family have before you became white, what kind of foods, and like all that's very important. And it's important to connect that. But also you have, like, white folks erased something in themselves and erased whole peoples and places in order to be what they are now. And so that's really, really important. So I appreciate you raising the complexity there.
Let me just, I know that Chris is getting ready to, or Wesley, somebody's getting ready to talk, but let me just jump in and say, yeah, what stories got erased or what stories got created in order to, wallpaper the room, as it were. And I was saying to your question in the Q&A that it's not that the newly discovered ancestry offers some means of absolution, or but it's more that it introduces you to yourself so that you can see more clearly the lie that white supremacy has told you about yourself, right? So it's easier to, part of the reason this is so hard for us as a people is that white folk are like, well, who am I going to be? Wait a minute. If I know ideologically, spiritually, I know I got to untether myself from white cultural identity. I know I got to do it. But there won't be any me. Who will I be if not this, right? And so the ancestry study helps to answer that question, right? You were somebody before the imposition of race and racism, right? So I just want to add to what Brandon said.
I would love to speak a little bit about Naomi's very first hack, the lies that our country, our history, and then our churches have told us. I remember it was so transformative for me whenever I was in college and then now being in seminary to revisit what it means, what racism means. For the longest time growing up in Alabama, in Deep South, being racist meant being mean to Black people. And that was it. And that's how we got past all of the systemic and institutional sins of our government, of our churches, of all those things, because we were nice, we were cordial to Black people. And that is a lie that our church, our country, our history books have told us, that it ends there. And shifting that conversation, not to be about cordiality or kindness, but to be about power and who holds it and how we wield it, was such a huge thing. And in continuing with that, I'm not sure if Alan Harris is still on here or not, but he brought up too that in our tradition, the Disciples of Christ tradition, a lot of times that lie that has been told to us is that Christian unity is more important than addressing the issues that might tear that unity down. And we have seen that happen in various ways over the decades and decades that we've been a tradition, of ways that we have, I think, broken the heart of God because we chose appearances and Christian unity over addressing things that might have torn that apart. And I don't know if he's still around or not, but he brought that up and hinted at that, and it was one of those ouch moments for our tradition. I'd also love to hear Nadine if she wanted to speak to her second question about what mass incarceration looks like in Canada that you mentioned in the chat box.
Yeah, as often the resident Canadian in the room or in the Zoom meeting room, I often hear our country, and I think, okay, well, it's the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. I've also heard, oh, well, Trudeau is so nice, and we, in Canada, you got, and I find it incredibly insulting. I understand the United States is the center of the universe, but we're your neighbor, and we are also a white settler nation, just like New Zealand, just like Australia. And as a white settler nation, we are not a nation. When I say we, I mean Canada. We are not a nation unless we committed genocide. White people didn't just organically come up from the pines. We should not be here. And when I say we, obviously I'm white passing depending on the circle that I'm in. But for me, when we talk about issues, for instance, mass incarceration, right? There's this prison to pipeline discussion, that they have in the States. And I think, to kind of limit yourself, and I'm not speaking directly to you, Brandon, but just I think as Americans, oh, well, this is just our issue. No, racism is global. It's not just in white settler nations. My mother's country was also colonized for 400 years. We also are obsessed about how big your nose is and how light your skin color is. There are so many, if we in North America or in the States just kind of think, oh, this is just our experience. This is just no, I think it does an incredible disservice to one, the lived realities of so many people around the world, but then also to the solidarity moments. It shouldn't have taken me to have a conversation with my African-American colleague to say, oh, we do that in our community too. We're always late too. And I think, actually, we are the global majority here. The minority are the people who are white, but then also have colonized us, so that they've colonized our minds and the way that we think and the way that we eat and do. And so what was my question? Maybe it wasn't so much a question as just a word of caution to my American colleagues, and just that don't let that colonization get, here and here. So.
Yeah, it wasn't until I had taken a few trips to Canada that I realized the way race is different there, and in bad ways and in beautiful ways, just experiencing the diversity of Toronto, but then also understanding the respect, the time that at least the Canadians I know, which may not be true of all Canadians, which couldn't possibly be true of all Canadians, take real time to revere the land upon which as you say, Turtle Island, the land that has been settled upon, and what had to take place in order for that to happen. So I believe, Chris, you brought up earlier about how we have these magnificent buildings and they're so beautiful. But we have to think about the blood in the soil, so part of that decolonizing is taking time to not be silent, but to speak to the reality of what's happening outside of our doorstep or underneath our doorstep, and how we actually were able to arrive at this place of privilege. And I'm saying we, when I say we, I take on the identity of a white person in a couple of ways. One is the implicit biases that lie within me, that in the ways I've been conditioned to be white as a person in America, and then also as a leader of a predominantly white church. So I'm Black, but I have to keep it real like that the majority of people I serve or I minister with and minister to are white. And that has its own complexities, gifts, and perils within itself. But my last question I want to enter into the room, it relates to this idea of decolonizing and understanding, is it only for white people? So should the whole attendee have been only white people, or is there decolonizing that needs to happen even within BIPOC?
I mean, I would say, white supremacy, I think, corrupts absolutely and completely. And so yeah, I think that you can be, enslaved by white supremacist ways of being and doing, regardless of what your phenotypical presentation is, regardless of what your racial heritage is. I think the work of decolonization is distinctly different depending upon the social location of the congregational community. And so, perhaps it's uprooting internalized oppression that Black and other non-Black POC congregations have to do. What of these lies have we believed about ourselves, right? How are we mimicking and mirroring white ways of using power and manipulating desire and what, so yeah, I think there is a work to do for all of us, because we have all been swimming in this water, right? But it is a different work. I think it's a different work for white folk. And so, but I agree with you that we all have to look inside to see what of this parasite, what destruction this parasite has done inside ourselves. Yeah.
So I would say I will take the mantle of representing in this meeting non-Black POC communities. It was really hard for me when I went to my first church anti-racism training, and they just kind of lumped all people of color, into one group and said, well, okay, it's just white people that need to work on this. And I thought, well, no, again, because of the Spanish colonization, there were so many, so much harm and damage that was done to my mother's people about, like, even who they were, like, oh, we don't want to be brown, so we don't actually want to be who we are, and it depends on, like, Fair and Lovely. I don't know if you guys know about that here, but it's a skin lightening cream, because you want to emulate the colonizer, right? But then it's not just superficial things, it's also the belief that they had about, white is right. So the darker that you get, the worse that you, so then they adopt, it's so sinister, because you have that, you immigrate to a place here, you're a settler, so you're occupying indigenous land, so that's a layer. And then the next layer is, okay, well, here's the white minority myth, the model minority myth. So if you just become as white as possible, we'll accept you. So if you become anti-Black, if you become anti-poor, a super, capitalist, you'll become like us. But then this last year, with coronavirus, oh, just kidding, you're a foreigner. Also, you can come build our railroads, but as soon as you develop a successful Chinatown, oh, just kidding, you're a foreigner. Oh, you can come here, from the Vietnam War, be a refugee in Louisiana. Oh, just kidding, we are actually going to lynch your people because you become, and so all of these common traits that, white people, they just do this 180. And I think a lot of Asian communities have, it is a struggle. There's, again, those layers, those intersections, right? To dig out of the colonization that's been done to you, if you're that kind of country like mine, in your past, but then also in your currently how you were doing it. Yeah, that's not easy. That's not easy. And then at the same time, how do you dig through all that and then, reach out to those communities that you've, traditionally really discriminated against? Yeah, we difficult in a different way.
Fantastic. So as we close, I want to give each of you an opportunity to just share the hack. It could be yours, the hack that impacted you the most over this past hour, and just a little bit about that. And so, Chris, I'm going to start with you.
The hack that stayed most with me. Boy, I don't have the right language, Brandon, but it is, and I'm tying it back to you, and I think it was you who helped us to think about the erasure of people.
Who are your people? Yep.
Who are your people, right? So, and it's that who not only erasing that story around that allowed me to claim this superiority within my own family, but the erasure of others. Who had to be erased for that story to rise up?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Nadine.
My apologies. I was responding to John in the chat. Can you say that again?
Sure. Which hack impacted you most, and what would you like to say about that?
I would say, honestly, I mean, I'm going to be selfish here, and just say, what Naomi had said to me, it's not about absolution. It's about being honest about your heritage and kind of saying, okay, it's got all these, great things, but also all these awful, terrible things. And so how do you come to one with that so that you can address how it is you're still perpetuating, those traditions today and how you can stop it. And so, yeah, just that word absolution just is like ringing around in my head. So thank you, Naomi.
Yeah. Wesley?
There's so many that everyone shared. So much good information was shared. The one that comes to my mind immediately, though, just right now, is when Naomi said, "Who's going to be there?" There's so many intersections, but as a queer person, wanting to know who invited, who is going to be invited, gives me so much information about, okay, will I be invited there? It's the same thing as if I'm looking at a church's website to see where they stand on LGBTQ issues before I'm showing up. It's the same thing, except I'm that's my way of asking who's going to be there. And I say that acknowledging that there's so many intersections with this topic and many others, while also understanding I'm not trying to change the topic either. So there's some tension there because we're talking about this, and yes, there's so many intersections, but this is what we're talking about now. So I say that with that tension there.
Thank you. Naomi?
I like Brandon's calling us into telling the truth, speaking treason fluently. In a society that penalizes truth telling, right? We call it whistleblowing, and then we completely discard the person who's trying to expose, right, the moral contradictions. What would it mean for our churches to start telling the truth? Use that truth muscle, right? It gets easier and easier every time. To be called treasonous and be all right with that, right? So I love that.
Thank you. Brandon?
Mind the business that pays you. Goodness. Listen, and especially when you started talking about cross-racial placements, you started getting in my business. You started getting in my business when you said because but the truth is it's yours too, right? Like we both have, and I can't wait to talk to you about that. We haven't talked about that before, but I that resonated deeply with me. The idea that as a Black pastor to a white congregation, we can be both visible and invisible. My God. And that speaks to power, right? Like the kind of power that we never pay attention to when judicatories make those placements with congregation. So thank you for the gift of helping us to pay attention to that.
Yeah. So mine is, it comes from Chris with the idea of the violence of silence. And it helps me to think about that although I'm not a white man, I do have certain privileges. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to figure out how I can stand up, be voice, be ally to a lot of decolonizing. Yes, it is a lot about race, but it has a lot to do with the oppression of a lot of different segments of people and humanness of people. So whether that refers to women, whether that refers to certain orientations, certain expressions, the way that you feel, or the way I, as a tall person, might oppress another short person. It's just like all these things that happen to us from the time that we are children, that we make one thing superior over another. So I'm just saying that, when I see things happening, when I see injustices, that it is my duty absolutely to speak up, to say the right things, to do the right things. And I hope that we all can get to that level of boldness. And I think we don't do that because we don't want to have the sacrifice. We don't want to have the stigma. What would we lose in order to do that? And we have to be willing to lose things because so many hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives in order for the six of us to be in this room together right now. So as we close, we pay homage and honor to those who have fought this journey in various ways, leading up to this point, to where we have not completely become decolonized, but we have certainly come a long way. And for that, God, we are grateful. We're grateful to each of you for joining us for this segment of New Church Hacks. We ask that you be with us. I think that's November 15th, around the end of November. You can go to our website to see when our next episode will be on how to do micro church and how to be micro church in today's context, and other episodes that we have had with New Church Hacks episode series. We love you. God bless you. We will see you next time.